Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of the Missouri Ozarks. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing what places and what times of day or night these documented stories reach. The winter of 1872 was particularly harsh in the Ozarks region of Missouri. Snow blanketed the rolling hills and dense forests, isolating the scattered homesteads and small communities that dotted the rugged landscape. In Shannon County, about 15 meso southwest of the small settlement of Eminence, stood the McCall family property, a once prosperous farmstead with a grand two-story home that had begun to show signs of neglect. The McCalls had been one of the wealthiest families in the region for decades, owning vast tracts of timber-rich land. Their prosperity began with Ezekiel McCall, who had arrived from Tennessee in the 1820s, when Missouri was still a young state. By all accounts, Ezekiel was a shrewd businessman who acquired land at remarkably low prices, often from desperate sellers facing financial ruin. Some local accounts suggest he was known for appearing at the doorsteps of troubled homesteads with cash in hand, just as families faced eviction or starvation. The architecture of the McCall house itself spoke to the family's status, constructed of locally quarried limestone with imported glass windows, a rarity in the region at that time. The two-story structure featured elaborate woodwork throughout, showcasing the fine timber that had built their fortune. A wide veranda wrapped around three sides of the house, offering views of the rolling Ozark hills and the vast McCall timber stands. Behind the main house stood several outbuildings, a carriage house, smokehouse, and the separate kitchen structure typical of wealthy homes in that era. About a quarter-mile down a well-maintained path stood the workers' quarters, simple cabins that housed the men who felled trees and operated the McCall sawmill near the current river. Local historian Abigail Thompson, writing in an 1899 account of Shannon County's prominent families, described the McCall estate in its heyday as a kingdom unto itself, requiring little from the outside world and imposing its will upon the surrounding countryside. Thompson noted that Ezekiel McCall had strategically purchased land containing not only valuable timber, but also the springs and streams that neighboring properties relied upon, effectively controlling water access for miles around. By December of 1872, the McCall family fortune had diminished considerably, though they still maintained an air of superiority among the locals. The family patriarch, Jeremiah McCall, Ezekiel's son, had been found dead in his study on the morning of December 18th. According to the county coroner's report filed 2 days later, Jeremiah had died of natural causes related to a weakened heart. This would have been unremarkable except for what followed. Within 6 months of Jeremiah's death, every remaining adult member of the McCall household had either died under questionable circumstances or disappeared entirely. By June of 1873, the Grand McCall house stood empty, its doors locked, curtains drawn. Local residents began to whisper about the McCall curse, though most attributed the family's misfortune to divine retribution for generations of predatory business practices. For nearly 90 years, the McCall property remained largely untouched, passing through distant relatives who never occupied the house. The land was eventually purchased by the state of Missouri in 1961 as part of a conservation effort. It was during the subsequent survey of the property that a state employee made a disturbing discovery in the root cellar beneath the dilapidated kitchen, a sealed metal box containing a leather-bound journal, several letters, and what appeared to be legal documents dating back to 1872. What these documents revealed would challenge everything known about the McCall family's demise and expose a pattern of calculated violence that had been hidden for nearly a century. The following account has been pieced together from these recovered documents, county records, newspaper archives from the Eminence Gazette, and interviews conducted with descendants of Shannon County residents in 1962 by historian Dr. Martin Holloway of the Missouri Historical Society. As we explore this case, we must acknowledge that some details remain unclear. Some witnesses contradicted one another, and certain critical moments were never documented. What follows is the most complete reconstruction possible of the events surrounding what local newspapers in 1962 would come to call the disturbing cold case of the McCall family inheritance. The morning that Jeremiah McCall's body was discovered began like any other winter day at the McCall estate. According to household records kept by Martha McCall, Jeremiah's wife, the temperature had dropped below freezing during the night. The handwritten note in her daily ledger simply stated, "Brostco covered windows entirely. Fire struggled to warm the house." Martha's ledgers recovered from the metal box reveal a methodical woman who recorded everyday occurrences with detached precision. In the weeks leading up to Jeremiah's death, her entries noted increasing tension in the household. On December 4th, she wrote, "J and V engaged in heated discussion in study. Doors closed, but voices carried. Mention of ledgers and discrepancies. V departed in visible anger, riding toward town despite approaching storm on December 10th. Another entry read, J received correspondence from Springfield, became agitated, requested private meeting with H later that evening. Both men subdued at dinner. The final entry before Jeremiah's death, dated December 17th, stated only, J, working late in study, refused dinner, requested not to be disturbed for any reason. Block engaged from inside. Her entry for December 18, 1872 was uncharacteristically brief. J found at desk Dr. Harper summoned funeral arrangements to be made. Dr. Thomas Harper served as the only physician for nearly 30 miles. His medical journal, preserved by his grandson and made available to researchers in 1959, contained more details about Jeremiah's death. Called to McCall residence early morning. Subject already deceased, likely for several hours. Rigor mortis present. No external signs of trauma. Face discolored. Eyes bloodshot. Consistent with heart failure, though the fixed expression suggested extreme distress at time of death. What Dr. Harper didn't include in his official report, but noted privately, was a curious detail about the scene. Study locked from inside. Door had to be forced open by eldest son. Papers scattered, ink spilled, not consistent with a man who knew he was dying. The doctor's journal also mentioned the behavior of the family members present. Mrs. McCall displayed appropriate grief, though remarkably composed. Eldest son, Victor, appeared distressed, but also impatient, repeatedly asking about official cause and timing of death. Younger son Harrison seemed genuinely shocked while daughter observed from doorway silent and watchful. Most curious was the reaction of Jeremiah's brother Theodore, who examined the room with unusual attention to detail, noting the position of various objects before anyone else thought to do so. The eldest son mentioned was Victor McCall, aged 37, in 1872, who stood to inherit the bulk of the family fortune according to local inheritance laws and custom. Victor had worked alongside his father for years, learning the family business of timber harvesting and land management. By all accounts, from business ledgers and correspondence with lumber mills in Springfield. Victor was a capable businessman, but lacked his father's ruthless efficiency. County records indicate that Victor had married Rebecca Stanton, daughter of a prominent banking family from Springfield in 1865. Their union had produced no children, a fact noted with disappointment in several of Martha's ledger entries. An 1871 letter from Jeremiah to a business associate in St. Louis, found among the papers in the metal box, mentioned that Victor's failure to produce an heir remains a concerning matter for the future of our enterprises. Harrison McCall, age 32, had studied law briefly in St. Louis before returning to Shannon County to assist with the family business. His wife, Louisa, originally from Kentucky, was described in local accounts as a refined woman, seemingly out of place in the rugged Ozarks. Harrison managed the financial aspects of the McCall timber business, keeping the account books and handling correspondence with buyers and suppliers. Eleanor McCall, a 27 and unmarried, remains the most elusive family member in the historical record. Martha's ledgers mention her only in passing, noting her proficiency at piano and her habit of taking long, solitary walks in the woods surrounding the property. One cryptic entry from October 1872 states, "E. returned from afternoon walk visibly shaken, claimed to have become disoriented in familiar territory, retired early without dinner, later heard weeping from her room." Theodore McCall, Jeremiah's younger brother by 5 years, had never married and lived in a small but well-appointed cabin near the sawmill. Business records indicate he managed the day-to-day operations of timber harvesting, supervising the workers, and ensuring quotas were met. Local accounts describe Theodore as taciturn but fair in his dealings with employees. What happened in the days following Jeremiah's funeral began the strange unraveling of the McCall family. According to Martha's ledger, the family solicitor, Mr. Everett Walsh, arrived from Springfield on December 23rd to read Jeremiah's will. The entire household gathered in the main parlor. Martha, Victor, and his wife Rebecca, the second son Harrison, and his wife Louisa, unmarried daughter Eleanor, and Jeremiah's younger brother Theodore, who had lived on the property for decades managing the timber operations. Walsh's personal journal, discovered among his effects after his own death in 1890, and preserved by his law firm, described the reading of the will as the most tension-filled room I've encountered in 20 years of legal practice. He wrote, "The document I was instructed to read differed significantly from the will Mr. McCall and I had prepared just 3 years prior. This new document, dated October 1872, contained radical alterations to the inheritance structure. The new will effectively disinherited Victor, leaving him only a small stipend rather than control of the family business and property. Instead, the bulk of the estate was divided between Harrison and Theodore, with Martha receiving a generous allowance and Eleanor a substantial dowry. Most surprising, however, was the inclusion of a previously unknown beneficiary, a man named Robert Hollister, described in the will as my most trusted associate and keeper of my confidences. No one in the room had ever heard of Robert Hollister. According to Walsh's account, Victor became enraged, accusing the lawyer of presenting a fraudulent document. He became so agitated that his brother Harrison was forced to restrain him physically. Walsh wrote, "Mrs. McCall appeared shocked, but remained composed while Theodore exhibited a curious lack of surprise." Walsh noted that Theodore's reaction particularly caught his attention. When Hollister's name was mentioned, I observed Theodore's hand move involuntarily to the inside pocket of his coat, as if to touch something concealed there. His expression, unlike the others, showed recognition rather than confusion. When Victor demanded proof of the will's authenticity, Walsh produced a letter allegedly written by Jeremiah 2 months earlier, explaining his decision. The letter, preserved in the metal box discovered in 1961, stated that Victor had been engaged in business practices that threatened the family's legacy and financial security. No specific allegations were outlined. The most disturbing aspect of the letter was its closing paragraph. "Should anything unexpected befall me before this matter is resolved, I entreat you, Mr. Walsh, to examine closely the circumstances. My son Victor possesses a temperament reminiscent of his grandfather, capable of extreme measures when his ambitions are threatened." Walsh noted that after reading this passage aloud, the room fell into a silence so complete that the ticking of the mantel clock seemed thunderous. Victor's face drained of all color before he stormed out, nearly removing the parlor door from its hinges. That night, according to Martha's ledger, Victor and Rebecca packed their belongings and moved to the guest house on the eastern edge of the property. The single line in Martha's otherwise meticulous record simply read, "Family fractured beyond repair. The house feels hollow." A letter from Rebecca to her parents in Springfield, dated December 24th, and intercepted by Martha, as noted in her ledger, revealed additional tensions. Victor rages against his father even now, claiming betrayal of the highest order. He speaks of challenging the will through legal channels, but in darker moments mutters about other solutions that worry me greatly. I have suggested we simply return to Springfield and begin anew, but he refuses to abandon what he calls his birthright. I fear the man I married is being consumed by bitterness. For the next 3 weeks, the McCalls existed in a state of uneasy tension. Business correspondence shows that Harrison and Theodore attempted to take control of the timber operations, while county records indicate that Victor made multiple trips to the courthouse in Eminence, researching property deeds and legal precedents for contesting wills. Martha's ledger noted increasingly strange occurrences around the property. On January 3rd, she wrote, "Footprints discovered in snow beneath study window. H believed someone attempted to gain entry during the night. Theodore suggested setting traps around the perimeter of the house. Locks checked on all doors and windows." On January 7th, E claims to have seen a figure watching the house from the edge of the woods. Theodore investigated but found nothing beyond some disturbed snow beneath the old oak. H has taken to keeping father's revolver on his nightstand. The mysterious Robert Hollister never appeared to claim his portion of the inheritance. Walsh's records show he sent inquiries to addresses in St. Louis, Kansas City, and even Chicago, but received no response. The portion of the inheritance designated for Hollister remained in legal limbo. Walsh made a curious notation in his journal on January 10th. "Received unusual correspondence today regarding the Hollister matter. Letter postmarked from Eminence but unsigned. Simply stated that Hollister walks among you still, though not by that name. Impossible to determine if this is mischief-making or something more sinister. Have not shared with the McCall family, as it would only increase tensions." On January 12, 1873, Theodore McCall went missing. According to a report filed with the county sheriff on January 14th, Theodore had gone to inspect a stand of timber approximately 2 miles from the main house and never returned. A search party composed of farm workers and neighbors found no trace of him, though heavy snow had fallen the night of his disappearance, potentially obscuring any tracks or signs of struggle. What the sheriff's report didn't mention, but Martha recorded in her ledger, was that Theodore had been acting strangely in the days before his disappearance. On January 10th, she wrote, "To arrived at dinner visibly agitated. claimed to have found unfamiliar boot prints circling the old oak at the north property line. Said the prints appeared and disappeared, as if someone had stepped from nowhere and returned to nowhere. H. dismissed his concerns as imagination inflamed by recent tensions. On January 11th, the day before his disappearance, Martha noted, T. spent morning and father's study examining old property maps. Asked D. about family stories regarding grandfather's early days on the property. Mentioned something about hollow spaces where no hollow should be. Left after lunch to inspect North Timber End despite approaching storm. Promised to return by dinner. Harrison McCall led daily search efforts for nearly 2 weeks before they were abandoned due to continued harsh weather. In her ledger, Martha noted, search concluded. T. presumed lost to the elements. H. suspects otherwise but keeps his thoughts private. Vi returned to main house, offering condolences that ring hollow. What Martha didn't record, but was later revealed in a letter Louisa wrote to her sister in Kentucky, was that Harrison had found Theodore's pocket watch near a ravine on the property's edge. The watch had been a gift from Jeremiah, engraved with the McCall family crest. According to Louisa's letter, dated January 30th, 1873, the watch was found beneath a fallen log as if deliberately placed rather than dropped. Harrison believes it was left as a message, though he refuses to elaborate on what such a message might mean. He has taken to carrying his father's revolver, even within the house. Louisa's letter continued with a disturbing observation. Most troubling is that Harrison discovered boot prints nearby that matched Victor's distinctive custom boots from St. Louis. When confronted privately, Victor claimed he had been searching in that area the previous day, but this contradicts his earlier statement to the sheriff that he had been in Eminence on business when Theodore disappeared. By February, Victor had moved his family back into the main house, ostensibly to support his mother during the difficult winter. County records show he filed a legal challenge to Jeremiah's will on February 3rd, claiming the document was fraudulent and that his father had been of unsound mind in the months before his death. The atmosphere in the house grew increasingly tense. Martha's ledger entries during this period became increasingly paranoid. She wrote of footsteps in the hallway long after everyone has retired, and the sense of being watched while alone in my sitting room. On February 12th, she made a troubling observation. Found my personal correspondence box unlocked and papers disturbed. V claims no knowledge, but his eyes betray him. Have relocated my journal to a more secure location. Rebecca, Victor's wife, became increasingly withdrawn according to Martha's observations. On February 14th, Martha wrote, R speaks rarely now and never contradicts Va. Though her expression sometimes suggests disagreement, she flinches at sudden movements. When V placed his hand on her shoulder at breakfast, she nearly upset her teacup. Something has changed between them. Eleanor's behavior also shifted dramatically during this period. Once described as quiet and bookish, Martha noted on February 15th. E now spends hours in the attic sorting through old trunks and papers. Says she is searching for something specific in grandfather's belongings, but will not elaborate. She has begun taking her meals in her room, claiming the atmosphere at the family table is unbearable. On the evening of February 17th, Harrison McCall told his wife he was going to examine the estate's financial ledgers in his father's study. According to Louisa's statement to the sheriff, preserved in county records, Harrison took a lamp and the key to the study around 8 p.m. When he hadn't returned to their bedroom by midnight, she went searching and found the study door locked from the inside, just as it had been on the night of Jeremiah's death. The family broke down the door to find Harrison slumped over the desk, the lamp overturned and the room filled with smoke from scorched papers. Though the fire had extinguished itself without spreading, several financial ledgers and documents had been destroyed. Dr. Harper, summoned once again to the McCall home, determined that Harrison had died from asphyxiation due to the smoke. In his private medical journal, however, Dr. Harper noted, "Second McCall death under remarkably similar circumstances. Study locked from inside, papers destroyed, signs consistent with asphyxiation, but bruising around the neck observed that cannot be explained by smoke inhalation alone. Sheriff informed of suspicious nature, though no formal investigation pursued due to family standing." Harper also recorded something he observed but did not include in his official report. Upon examining the room more carefully, noticed a curious device hidden behind books on the upper shelf. A small brass mechanism with glass components partially melted. When mentioned to Sheriff Harmon, he seemed reluctant to investigate further, suggesting it was likely some kind of clock or barometer damaged in the fire. The sheriff's report, filed February 19th, concluded that Harrison had accidentally knocked over the lamp while examining documents and was overcome by smoke before he could unlock the door. The report mentioned nothing about bruising or suspicious circumstances. Martha's ledger entry for February 18th was uncharacteristically emotional. "My son is dead. H would never have been so careless with a lamp. His hands were steady as his father's. The study smelled not just of smoke, but something acrid and unfamiliar." V expressed appropriate shock, but his eyes showed calculation rather than grief. "We are not safe here." Following Harrison's funeral, tensions in the McCall household reached a breaking point. Martha's ledger entries became erratic and filled with ominous observations. V now speaks of inheritance, as if already settled in his favor. Eleanor refuses to dine with the family, taking meals in her room. L prepares to return to her family in Kentucky. Despite V's insistence, she remains until matters are resolved. A particularly disturbing entry from February 27th read, "He came to my room past midnight, pale and trembling. Claims to have found a hidden compartment in grandfather's old trunk containing strange mechanical drawings and formulas for chemical compounds. Says she recognizes components similar to the device Harper found in the study. V nearly discovered us talking his footsteps outside my door at an hour when he should have been asleep. He escaped through the connecting door to the dressing room. On March 3, 1873, Louisa McCall left the family home before dawn, taking only a small traveling case. She left a sealed letter for Eleanor, which was discovered in the metal box in 1961. The letter read in part, "I fear I will be next if I remain." Harrison found something in his father's papers, something he planned to show me the night he died. He whispered to me that the pattern goes back to grandfather, and that Victor knows about the hollow tree. I do not know what this means, but I am certain it led to his death. Take care, dear sister, and watch the shadows. They move with purpose in that house. The letter continued with details that would later prove significant. Harrison believed he had discovered the identity of Robert Hollister. The night before his death, he told me he found correspondence suggesting Hollister was a name used by someone already known to the family. He intended to confront this person with evidence, but needed to organize his proof first. He mentioned a hidden compartment in Ezekiel's desk where additional documents might be found. Louisa traveled to her family home in Paducah, Kentucky. According to a brief notice in the Eminence Gazette, dated March 10, 1873, she never returned to Missouri, eventually remarrying and relocating to Tennessee in 1875. According to census records, the situation at the McCall home deteriorated further through March and early April. Martha's ledger entries became increasingly sparse and disjointed. On March 15th, she wrote, "V held private meeting with sheriff today. Afterward, sheriff informed me he would no longer be conducting regular patrols near our property, claiming limited resources needed elsewhere. The law has abandoned us to whatever fate awaits." On March 22nd, Rebecca bedridden with what V calls nervous exhaustion. Dr. Harper summoned but allowed to speak with her only in V's presence. Harper appeared troubled upon leaving, but would say nothing beyond prescribing rest. When I visited her chamber later, rasped and whispered, "The walls have ears," before V entered and ended our visit. On April 2nd, she wrote, "V now speaking openly about renovations to the house. Once matters are settled. Caught him examining the cellar foundations yesterday. He claimed to be concerned about spring flooding, but the look in his eyes spoke of other motives." A particularly cryptic entry on April 7th stated only, "He found scratches inside the hidden panel, says they match the others. Must move quickly before it is too late." Eleanor McCall, who had remained largely in the background of family records, suddenly emerges more prominently in Martha's journal entries during this period. E spends hours in the attic, sorting through old trunks, says she is searching for evidence of something she refuses to name. She grows thin and pale, startles at every sound. On April 10th, Martha noted a discovered hidden compartment in grandfather's writing desk. Inside was a small leather pouch containing strange metal components similar to those found in the study after H's death. Also found diagram labeled timer mechanism for vapor dispersion in grandfather's hand. E believes both J and H were murdered, using devices built from these specifications. On April 13th, E has connected the fragments. Ezekiel's journal contains encoded records of removals, business rivals, and reluctant sellers who died under mysterious circumstances. The same methods have been turned against our family. V discovered E in grandfather's trunk room today. Their conversation seemed civil, but E later told me she saw murder in his eyes. We cannot stay another night. On April 15th, Martha made her final ledger entry. Found Ezekiel's old journal hidden beneath the floorboards in E's room. The pages contain monstrous accounts that cannot be true. E claims they explain everything, the pattern, the inheritance, the curse. B must not find it. We leave tonight. Martha and Eleanor McCall disappeared that night. Victor reported them missing to the sheriff on April 17th, claiming they had left after a family disagreement and expressing concern for his mother's mental state. A brief search was conducted, but with no signs of foul play at the residence, the sheriff concluded they had left voluntarily. What Victor told the sheriff, according to the official report, was that Martha and Eleanor had become increasingly paranoid and delusional following the deaths of Jeremiah, Theodore, and Harrison. He claimed they had spoken of family curses and generational sins, and that Eleanor had been disturbed in her mind since childhood. The Eminence Gazette published a small notice on April the 24th, 1873. The McCall family sorrows continue as widow Martha McCall and daughter Eleanor have reportedly traveled east to stay with relatives following recent tragic losses. Victor McCall remains at the family estate, now the sole remaining member of what was once the county's most prominent family. A private letter from Rebecca McCall to her parents, dated April 30th, 1873, told a different story. I fear greatly for Martha and Eleanor. They would never have left without informing me, regardless of what Victor claims. Martha had confided in me her suspicions regarding the deaths in the family, though I dared not believe such terrible accusations against my husband. Now I find myself questioning everything. Victor spends hours in the cellar each night and refuses to allow me to enter that part of the house. I have written to my brother requesting he visit as soon as possible. County records show that by June 1873, Victor had successfully challenged his father's will with the court, ruling that the document presented by Walsh was invalid due to lack of proper witnesses and the suspicious absence of the beneficiary Robert Hollister. Victor McCall became the legal owner of all McCall properties and business interests. Rebecca McCall returned to her family in Springfield in May 1873, according to a notice in the Springfield Daily Register. The paper reported that she was in delicate health and seeking the comforts of her childhood home. She never returned to the McCall property and filed for divorce in October 1873, an uncommon and scandalous action at that time. The divorce was granted in January 1874 on grounds of extreme cruelty, though specific allegations were sealed by the court. Furiously, Victor never occupied the main house again after gaining control of the estate. According to tax records, he commissioned a new, smaller residence to be built half a mile from the original house in late 1873. The original McCall home was simply abandoned, its contents left undisturbed. Local accounts collected by historian Abigail Thompson in 1899 suggest that rumors circulated about Victor's reasons for abandoning the family home. One elderly resident told Thompson, "Folks said McCall couldn't abide the sounds in that old house, scratching and tapping in the walls at night. Some said it was just mice or the house settling, but others claimed it was the spirits of his family seeking justice. Whether true or not, that house stood empty until it fell to ruin, and no amount of money could convince local men to work on repairs." What happened to Victor McCall after 1873 presents another mystery. County records show him selling off parcels of McCall land throughout 1874 and 1875, gradually liquidating most of the family's holdings. By 1876, he had sold the timber business and remaining property to an investment company from St. Louis and reportedly moved west. No further records of Victor McCall appear in Missouri after 1876. A single, tantalizing clue to his fate appeared in an 1887 Denver newspaper. A small article regarding business dealings in the Colorado silver mining industry mentioned a prominent investor named Victor Marshall, who made his fortune in Missouri timber before seeking new opportunities in the West. The article noted that Marshall was known for his innovative mechanical devices used in mining operations and his reclusive habits, appearing in public only when absolutely necessary for business concerns. For decades, the original McCall house remained empty, becoming a subject of local legends and speculation. The property changed hands several times, but was never developed or occupied. When the state of Missouri acquired the land in 1961, the house was in advanced stages of decay. It was during the initial survey of the property that state employee Richard Dawson discovered the sealed metal box in the root cellar. In his report to the Missouri Historical Society, Dawson wrote, "The box had been concealed behind a false wall that had partially collapsed due to moisture damage. It appeared to have been deliberately hidden rather than simply stored." Dawson's report contained a curious detail omitted from official records, but shared with Dr. Holloway during his research. While examining the cellar area where the box was found, I noticed unusual tool marks on the surrounding stonework and what appeared to be a much larger sealed space beyond. Due to structural concerns and limited authorization, I did not attempt to open this space, but noted its location for future investigation. The contents of the box, Martha's ledgers, correspondence, legal documents, and most significantly, a leather-bound journal believed to be the one Martha referenced in her final entry, provided the first substantive clues to what really happened to the McCall family. The leather journal, bearing the initials E.M. and dated 1820-1845, contained Ezekiel McCall's private accounts of his business dealings during the early settlement of the Ozarks region. The journal revealed a pattern of ruthless acquisitions, often targeting families suffering misfortune. More disturbing were Ezekiel's methods for creating such misfortunes. Several entries detailed how Ezekiel would identify properties he desired, and then systematically engineer accidents or financial problems for the owners. One particularly chilling entry from 1832 described how he contaminated a family's well with a substance that caused a debilitating illness, allowing him to purchase their 200-acre property for a fraction of its value while they were desperate for money to seek medical treatment. In another entry from 1835, Ezekiel wrote, "The Thompsons proved more resilient than anticipated. Despite the unfortunate fire that claimed their barn and winter stores, the father refused my first two offers. The timing device placed beneath their bedroom operated perfectly, releasing the prepared vapor without detection. The resulting lung fever claimed both parents within a week. Their sons, now orphaned and overwhelmed by debt, accepted my final offer without negotiation." The journal also contained detailed technical drawings of various devices, including what appeared to be timing mechanisms, vapor dispensers, and hidden locking systems. One page, dated 1840, included a sketch of a device designed to be hidden behind books on a shelf with a notation. Improved timer allows for delayed release of prepared vapor, followed by small flame to eliminate evidence. Perfect for creating appearance of illness or accident, with no suspicion of external agency. Throughout the journal, Ezekiel referred to a hollow oak where he kept tools and records that must remain separate from public knowledge. This appears to be the hollow tree referenced in Lewis's letter to Eleanor. Most disturbing were Ezekiel's entries regarding his own family. He wrote of testing his son Jeremiah's resolve and worthiness by involving him in increasingly troubling business activities. An entry from 1843 stated, "Jay finally participated directly in preparation of special compounds. He still exhibits moral hesitation, but his desire for prosperity overcomes such weaknesses. He will either master these techniques or fall victim to them. Nature allows no middle ground in matters of survival." The final pages of the journal, dated 1845, suggested that Ezekiel was planning to fake his own death to avoid growing scrutiny from authorities in Springfield regarding his business practices. He wrote, "Arrangements complete for my passing. Jay understands his role and the necessity of maintaining appearances. The prepared illness will progress rapidly, allowing for quick burial before unwanted examination. The hidden chamber beneath the north cellar wall is prepared for my occupation during the transition period. When the furor subsides, Robert Hollister will emerge in St. Louis to continue our more sensitive business arrangements. The historical record shows that Ezekiel McCall officially died in 1845 of fever, but his body was buried with unusual haste, and the funeral was attended only by immediate family, according to church records from eminence. Dr. Rott Martin Holloway, the historian who examined these documents in 1962, proposed a shocking theory in his unpublished manuscript, Generational Violence in Ozark Homesteads, that Ezekiel McCall may not have died in 1845 at all, but rather faked his death and continued to influence family matters from seclusion, possibly living in a hidden space within the family home. Holloway wrote, "The evidence suggests not only that Ezekiel McCall orchestrated his own death, but that he continued to exert control over the family business from behind the scenes for decades. The mysterious Robert Hollister named in Jeremiah's contested will appears to be an identity Ezekiel himself used for business dealings after his supposed death. If this theory is correct, it raises disturbing questions about who actually controlled the McCall fortune during the period between 1845 and 1872, and what role this hidden patriarch might have played in the family's ultimate destruction. Holloway's theory, while speculative, would explain several anomalies in the McCall case. The mysterious Robert Hollister, named in Jeremiah's contested will, could have been an alias used by Ezekiel himself. Theodore's knowledge of timber operations exceeded what could be expected of someone in his position, suggesting he may have received guidance. Most tellingly, Martha's final ledger entry indicated that Eleanor had discovered something in Ezekiel's journal that explained everything. In his research notes, Holloway proposed a timeline of events that differed significantly from the accepted historical narrative. It appears likely that Jeremiah McCall discovered his father was still alive and living on the property, possibly in a hidden space specifically designed for that purpose. The evidence suggests Jeremiah intended to expose this deception, perhaps due to a moral awakening or fear of discovery. Before he could do so, he was murdered using one of Ezekiel's devices, the same type of device later used to kill Harrison when he began investigating his father's death. Holloway's investigation was abruptly discontinued in September 1962. His manuscript notes end with a curious entry have located what I believe to be the hollow oak referenced in Ezekiel's journal, approximately 1.5 misoak northwest of the main house, an ancient oak with a cavity large enough to hide a substantial cache of items. We'll investigate tomorrow with proper equipment. No further notes exist. According to Missouri Historical Society records, Dr. Holloway resigned his position the following week, citing health concerns. He relocated to Arizona and declined all further correspondence regarding the McCall research. Attempts to locate him for interviews in 1968 were unsuccessful. The location Holloway described was submerged beneath the waters of a reservoir created by dam construction in 1965, making verification of his findings impossible. His former colleagues at the Historical Society noted that Holloway had been in excellent health prior to his sudden resignation, and his decision to abandon what had been a passionate research project struck many as uncharacteristic. In a single letter sent to the Historical Society from Arizona in 1963, Holloway wrote, "Only some histories are better left undisturbed. The McCall research has convinced me that certain doors once opened cannot be easily closed again. I strongly advise against further investigation into this matter." In October 1962, a month after Holloway abandoned his research, a state maintenance worker made another discovery at the McCall property. While clearing debris from what remained of the root cellar, he found a sealed space beneath the floor. Inside were human remains, later identified through dental records as belonging to Martha and Eleanor McCall. Forensic examination, limited by the technology of the time, determined that both women had died from asphyxiation. They had apparently hidden in the concealed space, perhaps intending it as a temporary refuge only to become trapped when something heavy was moved over the access point. The forensic report filed with the Missouri State Police, but never publicly released, contains several disturbing details. The position of the remains suggests the victims were alive for some time after being trapped. The younger woman, Eleanor, was found in a seated position against the far wall, while the older woman, Martha, was positioned near what would have been the access point. Scratch marks on the underside of the heavy stone slab that sealed the space indicate repeated desperate attempts to open it from within. The most unsettling detail recorded in the forensic examiner's report, but omitted from newspaper accounts, was that scratch marks were found not only on the access panel, but also on the interior walls of the space, evidence that Martha and Eleanor had been alive and conscious while trapped in the space, desperately trying to escape. The report also noted among the remains were found a leather journal, presumed to be Ezekiel McCall's original diary mentioned in Martha's ledger, and a small brass device of unknown purpose partially disassembled. The journal was largely illegible due to moisture damage, but certain pages contain diagrams matching components of the brass device. A supplementary note added by the examiner stated, "The concealed space appears to have been originally designed for temporary occupation rather than storage. Ventilation shafts, now blocked, would have originally provided air. Evidence suggests these shafts were deliberately sealed from the outside, converting what might have been a hiding place into a tomb." No charges were ever filed in connection with these discoveries. Victor McCall, if still alive in 1962, would have been well over 100 years old. The case was classified as a historical finding rather than an active investigation. The McCall property was eventually developed as part of the Ozarks Scenic Riverways Park, with the original home site marked by a simple plaque describing it as one of Shannon County's earliest settlements. No mention is made of the family's troubling history or the discoveries of 1961-1962. Local residents who were interviewed in the mid-1960s shared various folk beliefs about the McCall property. Several mentioned that even animals avoided the area where the house had stood. Others claimed that on winter nights, when the wind blew from the north, the sound of scratching could be heard near the old cellar site. Walter Jenkins, who had worked as a logger in the area during the 1920s, told interviewers, "My daddy always warned us boys to stay clear of the McCall place. Said it wasn't haunted exactly, but that the land itself had gone bad from what happened there. Told us a story about how old man McCall had built hidden rooms and passages throughout that house so he could move around unseen and listen to folks' private conversations. Daddy claimed that after the family died out, people would still sometimes see lights moving inside the empty house, though no one lived there." Another local resident, Sarah Tanner, whose grandmother had worked briefly as a housekeeper for the McCalls in the 1860s, shared a family story. Gran always said there was something wrong with that house. Said she'd hear voices having conversations in empty rooms, and sometimes catch glimpses of an old man watching from doorways. Though Mistress Ezekiel had been dead for years by then. She quit after less than a month. Said no amount of money was worth the feeling of being watched all the time. Perhaps the most telling comment came from Elijah Winters, aged 97 in 1965, whose grandfather had worked briefly for the McCall timber operation. When asked about the family, Winters said, "My granddaddy told me that wealth flowed to the McCalls like water downhill, but it wasn't natural-like. Said, every dollar they made had pain behind it. Said, old Ezekiel made a science of other folks' suffering. Don't know if that's true, but I do know this. Ain't nothing ever grown right on that land since the malls held it." Winters added a detail that investigators found particularly interesting. Granddaddy claimed that years after Ezekiel supposedly died, some of the timber workers would see an old man watching them from the forest edge, always at a distance. When they had approached, he'd vanish like morning mist. The men thought it was Ezekiel's ghost, but my granddaddy wasn't so sure. He said once he found unusual boot prints near where the figure had been standing. Not ghost prints, but real boots that left real tracks. The final piece of the McCall puzzle emerged in 1968, when renovations to the Eminence Courthouse uncovered a sealed letter that had been placed between walls during an 1876 expansion. The letter, written by Sheriff James Harmon and addressed to any future officer of the law, contained a remarkable confession. Harmon admitted to deliberately mishandling the investigations into the McCall deaths due to bribes from Victor McCall. He wrote, "I have carried the weight of my corruption for these years, and find I cannot take it to my grave. I turned a blind eye to murder for the sake of money and position. Victor McCall killed his father, his brother, and I believe his uncle as well, though no body was ever found." The letter described how Victor had demonstrated the method used to kill Jeremiah and Harrison. He showed me how a man could be in a locked room, appear to have died naturally or by accident, with the killer safely elsewhere. The method involved a mechanical device set with a timer which would release a poisonous gas, then later ignite a small fire to eliminate evidence. The device could be hidden behind books on a shelf or within a desk drawer, leaving no trace after the flames had done their work. Harmon wrote that his suspicions were first aroused when examining Harrison's death scene. The study door was locked from inside, just as with Jeremiah's death. Yet Harrison's body showed signs of struggle that contradicted the official narrative of accidental asphyxiation. When I questioned these inconsistencies privately, Victor invited me to his new house the following day and demonstrated the device's operation using a small animal as test subject. The implications were unmistakable, both a demonstration of method and a veiled threat should I pursue the matter further. The sheriff continued. Regarding Martha and Eleanor, I believe they discovered evidence of Victor's crimes and planned to flee. Victor implied to me that they would not be a concern much longer, though he never directly admitted to harming them. When they disappeared, and Victor reported them missing, I conducted only a cursory search. Deliberately avoiding areas of the property Victor seemed anxious to keep private, particularly the old root cellar. Harmon concluded his confession. I write this, knowing it may never be read, but hoping that someday justice might be served, even if only in the court of history. The McCall fortune was built on suffering and maintained through murder. Victor McCall was merely the last practitioner of a family tradition that began with Ezekiel. I believe Ezekiel taught Jeremiah his methods. Jeremiah taught his sons. And when Victor felt his inheritance threatened, he turned these family secrets against his own blood. A postscript, seemingly added after the main letter was complete, contained one final disturbing revelation. I have come to suspect that old Ezekiel McCall may not have died when reported in 1845. Victor once spoke when deep in his cups of a clever ancestor, who found a way to disappear while remaining close at hand. When I pressed him on this strange statement, he grew guarded and claimed I had misunderstood. I now wonder if the McCall house contained hidden spaces where a man might live for years, unseen but present, directing family affairs from the shadows. The sheriff's letter was authenticated by handwriting comparison with official documents and is now preserved in the Missouri State Archives. It represents the final confirmation of what Dr. Holloway had pieced together from the scattered evidence that the McCall family's wealth and power had been secured through generations of calculated violence, culminating in Victor's elimination of his own family members to secure the inheritance. What became of Victor McCall after he left Missouri remains unknown. Some records suggest a man matching his description, and, using the name Victor Marshall, established a successful mining investment business in Colorado in the 1880s. But no definitive connection has been established. A Denver newspaper article from 1893 reported that prominent businessman Victor Marshall had died in a home laboratory accident, the result of experimental work with mining chemicals. The article noted that Marshall had lived alone in a large house outside Denver, with few visitors and no known family. His considerable estate was donated to a mining engineering school, according to instructions in his will. Whether this was indeed Victor McCall remains speculative, though the manner of death, a laboratory accident involving chemicals, seems a fitting end for a man who had used similar methods against his own family. The McCall case stands as a disturbing example of how wealth acquired through unethical means can corrupt subsequent generations, creating a legacy of violence that extends far beyond the original perpetrator. Ezekiel McCall's methods documented in his own hand became a blueprint for his descendants, a family tradition more binding than blood. In 1965, before the creation of the reservoir that would cover much of the original McCall property, a final discovery was made that lent credence to Holloway's theories about Ezekiel's fake death. During demolition of what remained of the McCall house foundation, workers uncovered a previously unknown substructure, a small room accessible only through a narrow passage in the north cellar wall. The room, approximately 8 square, contained a cot, writing desk, and shelves holding various personal items. According to the foreman's report filed with the Missouri Department of Conservation, but never publicly released, the space showed evidence of long-term habitation. Most telling was an inscription carved into one wall, EM 1845-1871. If accurate, this would suggest that Ezekiel McCall had indeed faked his death in 1845 and lived secretly on the property for another 26 years, possibly emerging occasionally as Robert Hollister to conduct business. This timeline would place his actual death shortly before Jeremiah's in late 1872, perhaps explaining Jeremiah's increasingly erratic behavior in his final months. As noted by Martha in her ledger, the foreman's report concluded, "The discovery of this hidden room lends credibility to local legends about the McCall house." The space was ingeniously designed with small air shafts disguised as ordinary drainage features, and a peephole system that would have allowed the occupant to observe activities in several main rooms of the house. Most disturbing was the discovery of what appeared to be listening tubes built into the walls, allowing conversations throughout the house to be heard from this hidden location. Today, the waters of the reservoir cover much of the original McCall property. The foundation stones of the house were removed during park development in the late 1960s. Nothing remains of the physical structure that once housed so much hidden violence. Yet, the story persists in regional folklore and academic studies of frontier-era crimes. The term McCall inheritance has even entered the local vernacular in Shannon County used to describe any situation where prosperity masks underlying corruption or violence. A park ranger who has worked in the Ozark scenic riverways for over 30 years shared this observation with folklore researchers in 2003. We still get reports every few years from campers or hikers who claim to have seen an elderly man watching them from the tree line near where the old McCall property was located. The descriptions are always similar: formal dark clothing from another era, stern expression observing rather than interacting. When approached, the figure retreats into the forest and cannot be located. The ranger added, I've never seen this figure myself, but I've walked the area where the house once stood. Even on the hottest summer days, there's a peculiar coolness there, like the ground itself hasn't warmed since the reservoir was created. Wildlife behaves strangely too. Deer and other animals will detour around that specific location, even though it looks no different from the surrounding forest. Some things leave an impression that time doesn't erase. Perhaps the most appropriate epitaph for the McCall family comes from the final page of Martha's ledger, a quotation she attributed to Eleanor. "The inheritance that destroyed us was not land or money, but the hidden knowledge of how our fortune was truly made. Some legacies, once accepted, cannot be escaped." The metal box containing these records is now housed in the Missouri Historical Society archives in St. Louis, cataloged simply as Shannon County Historical Materials, 18201, 1873. Few researchers request access to these materials, and fewer still connect them to the pleasant parkland that now occupies the former McCall property. For those who know the story, however, the scenic vista holds a darker aspect, a reminder that beneath the surface of even the most respectable family histories, terrible secrets may lie waiting to be discovered. And sometimes, as in the case of the McCalls, the discovery comes too late for justice, leaving only the hollow echo of crimes long past. When you visit the Ozark scenic riverways today, you might pass by the former McCall property without a second thought. The Park Service map labels it simply as historic home site, but local guides still avoid the area after sunset, and fishermen report that the reservoir is strangely empty of fish near where the old house once stood. In 2005, a university archaeology team conducted a brief survey of the shoreline during a period of drought when the reservoir water level had dropped significantly. Their report noted an unusual finding. The soil samples from the area corresponding to the former McCall property show unexplained chemical anomalies. Analysis detected trace amounts of compounds consistent with the special formulations described in Ezekiel McCall's journal, metallic compounds and organic substances that would have been toxic when combined. These compounds appear to have leached into the soil over decades, creating a persistent environmental effect that may explain the continued absence of wildlife in this specific area. The team's request for a more comprehensive investigation was denied by park authorities who cited concerns about disturbing a popular recreational area and the prohibitive cost of remediation if widespread contamination were confirmed. The preliminary findings were filed away, and the site remains unmarked except for the simple historical plaque. A Missouri historian who has studied the McCall case extensively offered this reflection in a 2010 academic paper. The McCall family represents a dark aspect of frontier capitalism, the pursuit of wealth by any means necessary, regardless of human cost. What makes their story particularly disturbing is not just the methods they employed to build their fortune, but how these methods eventually turned inward, destroying the family from within. The technical ingenuity Ezekiel applied to eliminating business competitors became in his grandson's hands a means of eliminating family rivals for inheritance. The historian continued, "Perhaps most chilling is the possibility that Ezekiel himself, having faked his own death to escape accountability, lived long enough to witness or even influence the destruction of his descendants. If the hidden room discovered in 1965 truly was his secret dwelling, he may have observed the family's unraveling from behind the walls, a ghost in life as well as death. Some things, it seems, leave an impression that outlasts physical evidence, a disturbance in the natural order that never quite resolves. The McCall inheritance may have disappeared from bank accounts and property records, but its true nature, a legacy of calculated cruelty, passed from generation to generation, continues to haunt the landscape where the family once lived and died. In the winter, when the trees stand bare against the gray sky and cold winds sweep across the water, park rangers occasionally report receiving visitor complaints about strange sounds near the old home site, but some describe as scratching, others as whispers. The official response is always the same, just the wind moving through the hollow spaces of the forest. Natural sounds, nothing more. But those familiar with the full story of the McCall family might recognize these sounds for what they truly represent: the final testimony of those who discovered the terrible truth behind the family fortune. Their voices still trying to be heard across the decades, warning of an inheritance built on suffering and maintained through blood. The ultimate legacy of the McCalls is not the land they owned or the wealth they accumulated, but the cautionary tale they left behind. A reminder that fortunes founded on the suffering of others carry a weight that eventually crushes even those who believe themselves immune to consequence. Their story speaks to a universal truth that the methods we employ to achieve our ambitions ultimately shape not just our circumstances, but our character and our fate. As one local saying goes in the Ozarks, the McCall curse wasn't something that fell upon them. It was something they built with their own hands, piece by piece, generation after generation. In this sense, perhaps the most terrifying aspect of the McCall story is not its uniqueness, but its universality. The recognition that moral compromises once accepted create paths that become increasingly difficult to abandon. The waters of the reservoir rise and fall with the seasons, alternately concealing and revealing fragments of the past. But the McCall inheritance remains constant beneath the surface. A legacy of brilliant, terrible innovation turned to dark purpose, and the destruction that inevitably follows when family becomes merely another obstacle to overcome in the pursuit of wealth and power. For those who visit the Ozark scenic riverways and pass unknowingly over the site where the McCall house once stood, perhaps there's a momentary chill, a fleeting sense of unease, quickly dismissed and forgotten. But for those who know the story, who understand what lies beneath the placid surface, the true horror of the McCall inheritance remains, not supernatural curses or vengeful ghosts, but the all-too-human capacity for calculated cruelty passed down as a family tradition, father to son, generation to generation, until it finally consumed them all.